Hello and welcome. Tonight we journey to Hollowbrook, a town nestled in the shadow of a place no one speaks of above a whisper, the old Harrow estate. For centuries, it has loomed on the hill, its dark windows like vacant eyes watching over the residents below. It's a place of local legend, a dare for brave children who rarely make it past the rusted iron gates before a primal fear sends them running back to the safety of the town lights. Ghost stories, however, were not the currency of Daniel's world. Daniel was a historian, a man who dealt in facts, dates, and documented evidence. He believed in reason, in the tangible explanations behind every shadow and every creaking floorboard. So, when the news broke that the Harrow estate was slated for demolition, he saw not a haunted mansion but a historical treasure trove on the brink of extinction. He volunteered, of course, to be the one to step inside and catalog any remaining artifacts. It was his duty, his passion, to preserve the past, not to fear its phantoms. On a crisp autumn evening, with the sun bleeding its last light over the horizon, Daniel arrived. Armed with his trusty notebooks, a satchel of tools, and a powerful lantern, he was ready to dismantle the legends piece by piece. He unlocked the heavy oak door, the sound echoing in the unnatural quiet of the grounds, and stepped across the threshold. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of dust, decay, and something else, something ancient and still. The floorboards groaned under his weight, a deep, resonant sound, almost as if the house itself was sighing, acknowledging his presence. It was a sound he'd heard in many old buildings, the natural settling of wood and time. He noted it and moved on. The grand entryway was cavernous, its vaulted ceiling lost in the shadows above the reach of his lantern beam. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects draped in the finery of bygone eras. As he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He'd pause, turn his light onto one of the paintings, and the eyes would seem to follow his every move. He ran a hand through his hair, chuckling softly to himself. "It's just the brushstrokes," he murmured, his voice a small foreign sound in the immense silence. A classic optical illusion. Nothing more. He was here for facts, not feelings. His exploration led him to the study. This, he thought, would be the heart of his research. Bookshelves, groaning with leather-bound volumes, lined every wall. A massive mahogany desk stood as a monument in the center of the room. But it was a glass-fronted cabinet that truly caught his eye. Inside, neatly stacked, were dozens of diaries, all bound in the same dark leather. He carefully opened the cabinet. A faint scent of lavender and old paper wafted out. He picked up the topmost diary. The name Eleanor Harrow was elegantly embossed on the cover. He opened another and another. The name was the same on all of them. Curiosity piqued, he began checking the dates. The first one was from the late 17th century. The next, the early 18th. The one after that, the mid-19th. The dates spanned centuries, far, far longer than any single woman could possibly live. Was it a family tradition, passed down from mother to daughter, each named Eleanor? It was a plausible theory. He sat down at the great desk, opened one of the oldest diaries, and began to read. The handwriting was a graceful, looping script, yet as he scanned the page, an unsettling feeling washed over him. It was familiar. Eerily so. It was like looking at his own handwriting, but reflected in a strange, distorted mirror. He shook his head, blaming the dim light and his overactive imagination. The entry spoke of a profound, suffocating loneliness. Eleanor wrote of the house as if it were a living entity, a companion and a jailer. She described how the walls seemed to absorb every word, every laugh, every tear, holding on to the memories of all who passed within them. Daniel felt a shiver trace its way down his spine as he read one particular line. The ink slightly darker than the rest. "The house keeps us, so we never fade." He closed the diary, the silence of the room pressing in on him. It was just poetic language, he told himself. The melancholic prose of a woman isolated from the world. As the evening deepened and true night fell outside, the character of the house began to shift. It was no longer just old and silent, it felt restless. A door down the hall slammed shut, the boom echoing through the mansion. Daniel jumped, his heart pounding. "The wind," he said aloud, though he knew there wasn't a hint of a breeze. His lantern, previously burning with a steady, bright flame, began to sputter and dim, then flared back to life, though there was no draft to cause it. It was then he started to hear them. Faint whispers seeming to emanate from the very walls around him, from the intricate patterns on the wallpaper. They were just beyond the edge of his hearing, like a radio tuned between stations. Words he could almost, but not quite, understand. Compelled by a force he couldn't name, part academic curiosity, part a dawning dread, he followed the phantom sounds. They led him out of the study, through a long, dark corridor, and into what must have been the grand ballroom. The room was a wreck. Moonlight, cold and silver, streamed through shattered floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a dance floor covered in debris and sparkling shards of glass from a fallen chandelier. And there, against the far wall, stood a massive, gilded mirror, its surface fractured into a spiderweb of cracks. As he approached, he saw his own reflection, distorted by the broken glass. But then it shifted. He wasn't alone in the reflection. Standing beside his image was another figure, a man, dressed in an old-fashioned tailored suit. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, yet they seemed to plead with him. Daniel spun around, his lantern beam cutting a frantic arc through the darkness. The ballroom was empty. There was no one there. His breath hitched in his throat. With trembling hands, he turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there, trapped in the glass world. Its lips were moving, forming silent words he couldn't hear. On pure instinct, Daniel reached out and pressed his hand against the cold surface of the mirror. In the reflection, the man's hand rose to meet his. The glass felt like a block of ice, a chilling cold that seeped into his skin, into his very bones, and then he heard it. Not from the mirror, but from everywhere at once. From the walls, the floor, the ceiling. A chorus of whispers, all speaking a single word, his name. Daniel, stay. In that instant, his lantern died, plunging him into absolute suffocating darkness. The silence that followed was worse than the whispers. It was a heavy, expectant void. Then the house truly came alive. The wooden beams groaned, not like settling wood, but like stretching bones. The whispers returned, no longer faint, but rising to a clear, multi-toned chorus, swirling around him. Panic seized him. He turned and stumbled back the way he came, desperate for the exit. But the hallway wasn't the same. It twisted and turned in ways it hadn't before. He ran down one corridor only to find it led him back to the ballroom. He tried another, and it looped him into a decaying parlor he'd never seen. The house was folding in on itself, reshaping its own architecture into an impossible labyrinth, a trap designed to keep him. He ran, his breath tearing from his lungs, until he burst through a doorway and found himself, impossibly, back in the study. The room was different now. The diaries, which he had left stacked on the desk, were splayed open across the floor, their pages turning as if caught in a frantic wind that he couldn't feel. As he stared, horrified, he saw the text on the pages shifting. Every entry, which had once borne the name Eleanor Harrow, now bore his own. His name in that eerily familiar script. His lantern flickered back to life, casting a weak glow on the final page of the nearest diary. A single line glowed with a faint, ghostly light. The house remembers him now. Daniel opened his mouth to scream, a raw, primal sound of pure terror. But the sound was swallowed by the room. The walls, the books, the very air seemed to absorb it, leaving him in total silence. His lantern then returned to its full, steady brightness, revealing a perfectly normal, dusty room. The diaries were closed and stacked neatly in their cabinet. The portraits in the hall stared down with placid, painted indifference. The next morning, the demolition crew arrived, their heavy machinery rumbling. They found the Harrow estate sealed up tight. The windows were unbroken, the great oak door locked from the inside. It took them hours to pry open the main entrance. When they finally forced their way into the study, they found it empty, coated in a thick, undisturbed layer of dust. Everything seemed untouched, except for one thing. There, resting inside the glass cabinet, was a new diary. A diary that hadn't been there the day before. Its leather was pristine, and as the foreman picked it up, he saw that the ink on the first page was still wet. The name written there, in an elegant, looping script, was Daniel's. The house had a new story to remember. Thank you for joining me in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a journey into the unknown.